In this lesson, we'll look at the advantage that groups have over string attributes, and that's that groups are more flexible and easier to work with for saving ad hoc selections. While saving selections within a string attribute, such as the name or the path attribute, is efficient in terms of memory, we need to be very deliberate and structured about how we create and modify those attribute values. If we think of saving selections within a string attribute as putting geometry selections into folders within a file system, then a component can't live within two different folders at the same time. So these primitives at the pole at the top can only live within this single directory. They can't also live within this pole directory at the bottom. In a file system, a file can only live within a single folder, and in the same way, a primitive can only have a single value for a string attribute. For example, with these primitive selections saved within this name attribute hierarchy like this, if we wanted to save this top pole and this bottom mid sets of primitives as a new selection, then we can't do that within this name attribute without affecting the existing selections. If I add another name node and call this selection alternate_bands. Now in the attribute list, we have this new alternate_band selection, but we've lost that hierarchy and we've lost the top pole selection and the bottom mid selection. We've simply overwritten the existing string attribute values with new ones for these selected primitives. We don't have this same problem with groups though. If I come over to the groups geometry stream and I'll change my selection mode to by group. Now I'll make that same primitive selection and I'll group these. And I'll give this group the same name of alternate_bands. In this case, we see that all the existing selections are still intact. Nothing gets affected by adding a new group. We can think of groups as a tagging system. A component can belong to any number of different groups, and this makes them very flexible for saving ad hoc selections. Let's say that we want to make and save another selection on this sphere, and this time I'll turn off the select by groups and attributes mode, and I'll select a pattern of primitives like this. Now I'll group this, and I'll call this group pattern. Again, we see that we've not affected any of the existing groups on the geometry. Saving this range of different selections is something that we just wouldn't be able to do within the name attribute or any other single string attribute. We can use both the name attribute and groups on the same piece of geometry. For example, I could just copy this last group node that I've just added, and I'll wire it in after these name nodes, and there we have the best of both worlds. We can use the name attribute for structured and ordered naming of non-overlapping selections, and then we can use groups for any ad hoc selections that we want to make whilst we're working. So in this section, we've seen the fundamental differences and the advantages and disadvantages of using groups versus string attributes to save component selections. A string attribute behaves like a file system. It's efficient and it can contain a path to provide hierarchy and organization. The downside of using a string attribute to save name component selections is that each component can only have a single value. It can only belong to a single selection set. Groups behave like tags. A component can belong to any number of groups, and we can keep adding new groups without worrying about affecting existing groups. The downside of groups is that they become quite inefficient when we have a large number of them on a piece of geometry. We'll be working with both groups and the name and path string attributes as we continue through these next couple of courses, and we'll be looking at specific scenarios of when we'd use one over the other.